Okay, hello, how is everyone? Good. I think, yeah, we'll use the roving one for this. So, hello and welcome. Those of you who have been to events that myself and my team have hosted know our goal is to start on time and end on time. And Roger, I was looking around the room for you. I didn't look back in the corner behind the camera, so welcome.
If I'm not on the dais, I'm behind a camera.
Okay, well there we go. There we go. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. And if I could take a moment and have my team come over here or just come to the front so I can introduce you. I'd like to introduce you to Becca Marr. We'll have, she's gonna grab the rest of the team real quick. One of the things that I am really lucky to have as a legislator is a strong team behind me. So this is Becca Marr and Emily Eccleton. I'd like you to welcome them. The fact that you're here is one of the reasons is they put together, how many of you got an automated call to your home saying we were going to have this town hall? Did anybody here get the personal call to your home? We made several hundred of those. How many of you got a postcard in the mail? Emily designed, oh good, lots of postcards. Emily designed and got that through the process. So they put in a lot of work to make sure that we live up to our promise in our legislative office to be truly engaged in our community, reaching out and making sure you have every opportunity to participate in government and in the issues that are important to us. So thank you so much, Emily and Becky, and I'll take you off the spot now. They didn't sign up for that, I did. So welcome. It seemed to be serendipitous that we planned this back in December, and now in the last week there's been an awful lot in the news. So, we're going to discuss those and we're going to do that. One of the things that I have to say a lot as a legislator up in Lansing is not a lawyer. Right? A lot of times people think you're a lawyer when you're writing bills. But what I wanted to say tonight is not an expert on everything that has to do with clean water. And that is really important. Because what we never want to do is make guesses or think we're doing something and try to figure things out or make statements that are inflammatory or make statements that underwhelm the problem. And so what we have here tonight is a panel of experts. And so I'm going to keep this real short and quick so that we can get to their work and get to your questions. Our goal tonight is for each panelist to give us a few minutes of introduction on their area of expertise, what they've been working on, and then we're going to roll right into questions. What I'm going to ask is that there are a lot of new faces in this room. And there are a lot of people in this room who know a lot about this issue. I would ask that if you have a question that you already know the answer to, just hang on to it. All right? And if you're asking a question because you want everyone else to hear the answer, maybe hang on to that while some folks who have questions that they just don't know the answer to have the opportunity to ask those questions. As always, if you have signed in, when someone asks a question, and it always happens, that the experts on the panel, myself, my team, don't have the answer to, after every town hall, we send out an email that has every website that's been mentioned, every phone number, every contact piece of information, everything you wish you had written down while you were here, or wrote down and now can't read your writing. If you have given us your email, we will send a follow-up email and all that information will be in there, as well as PDFs of any handouts that are mentioned or anything that happens there. So I really want you to be in the moment, be able to listen to the questions and be able to listen. If I have a quick moment to also acknowledge all the elected officials that are in the room. So if you could all just stand up. I know the mayor of Chelsea, Melissa Johnson, there. We have trustee from Webster Township, John Sharp. City Councilwoman Kathy Griswold, Scio Township Trustee Kathy Knowles. I'm looking at Jack Knowles. Supervisor, no, I just called you Kathy Knowles. Supervisor Jack Knowles. Christine Green, Trustee, Scio Township. Celine Mayor, Brian Morrow. Don't sit down before I say your name, Brian. Celine Mayor, Brian Morrow. Any other elected, oh, there we go. Jason Maciejewski, County Commissioner. Oh, look at that. And we have our clerk, Nancy, back there. Who's only going to be our clerk for just a little bit more. Is that, I don't have my glasses on. Did I say the right name? Okay. Oh, and, yeah, and there is Janet Dillon.
I think Brian's got it.
Who's coming in? Anyway, City Council, Celine. I misheard you, Mary. And any other elected officials? Oh, there we go. Lenore from Northfield Town. Yep, thank you. I apologize. And then anyone else? Okay, good. So these are, when you hear these issues, remember, especially when we're talking about water, there are layers of government at our local, our county, and our state and our federal level who all come together and interact on this. Do we have any more chairs available? Can everybody raise their hand if there's an empty chair next to them? We've got one over here. Can we use these chairs here? A couple folks are reading those for stuff? Okay. All right. So we'll get some more chairs. All right, so real quick legislative update. We know that our governor, Governor Whitmer, who just took office in January, campaigned on a promise of clean water. She has worked to reorganize the Department of Environmental Quality into a new department called EGLE, which will have a focus on the environment and the Great Lakes. Water will be a key priority of that. There are two things that happened in Lame Duck that I believe will be impeding our progress on clean water. There are two things that I voted against that I'm very concerned about. One is the no stricter than federal rule, or that no rule can be implemented that is stricter than a federal standard. It's something I spoke against multiple times on the House floor, and actually today a joint commission a joint committee meeting was held between the Department of Natural Resources and the Natural Resources Appropriation Team. And a friend of mine from the other side of the aisle was very upset with the DEQ that they hadn't set a safe drinking water standard for PFAS, which is one of the chemicals we'll be debating. But with the no stricter than federal rule and the fact that we left in place the commissions that are appointed with corporations and industrial folks and manufacturers appointed to those commissions who can block any rule setting that's done. And then you can't set a rule that's stricter than federal without putting it through the full legislative process, the House, the Senate, and having the governor sign it. And we have really gotten in our own way. So I'm going to need lots of voices if you agree with me. Love to hear your voice if you disagree with me. But we are going to be taking steps. We are going to be aggressive about this. And we're going to try and do really creative things like we were able to do with Dioxane here in our community, which we went through a separate rulemaking process, and we're able to lower the clean drinking water standards from 85 parts per billion to 7.2 in the last 12 months. And we were able to do that in a rulemaking process separate from the legislative process. So we're going to keep working towards those solutions. The clear need for every resident to trust that when they turn on their tap, that what they're having come out of it is clean and safe for our families, seems so obvious. It just seems obvious. And my cousin, I don't know if any of you have this, but my dad and his brother somehow magically had 3 kids in a row, and on both sides we were all just a couple months apart. I'm not sure how that happened, so we kind of grew up as a group of 6. So my cousin Tammy lives in Rockford, where the first PFAS was found, and her daughters are, one just started at U of M, and her second daughter is 15. And she just found out that since they were 3 and 1 in Rockford, she's been raising her children on PFAS-laden water, had one of the highest well concentrations, and now has a series of 5 filters in her basement that they're not exactly sure if they're doing what they think they were supposed to do, because they're just trying to figure it out on the fly. That is not acceptable. That is not acceptable anywhere, at any time, with anything that we do. And so I just want to be very clear about where I stand on this. I don't want anyone to leave here confused at all. As the 52nd House District with the communities of Saline, Manchester, Chelsea, Dexter, and Whitmore Lake, we are a combination of city water systems and well systems. That's a little bit unique. Most districts have kind of more all rural or more urban areas. We have a unique combination of city and a large population. Most of the district geographically is on private well. And so we have a little bit of different issues there because, as you can imagine, at the state level, the priority has been to test all of the water treatment centers, because you can impact the most people by determining that the finished water coming out of a water treatment center is safe and clean. So one of the experts up here tonight will be addressing wells. How can you test your well? And how can you know if your well water is providing clean, safe drinking water to you? So without further ado, I'm going to walk down the line and just introduce the 4 panelists, hand over the microphone, and then from that point forward, I will be the moderator. I am the mother of 3 boys, 17, 19, and 22. So if you think you're gonna, grab the mic and hold it for the rest of the night, ain't gonna happen. All right, so I'm gonna be kind of a fierce moderator tonight to make sure as many people as can have their questions answered. We promptly began at 6 o'clock. We will promptly end at 7:30. As always, I will remain to answer any questions you have, but to respect the time frame that we put it in, and so nobody feels embarrassed when they get up and walk out at 7:30. We will respect those time frames, but we will always stick around to answer any individual questions, okay? All right, ready to roll. So our first expert, it says Gerald on the card, but we're gonna call him Jerry. Jerry is an expert that is well known in Scio Township. He has been an advocate for us from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality on the dioxane issue and now on the PFAS issue as well. And we're gonna explain a lot of these words, and we're gonna try and be acronym-free tonight. And as much as possible. So please do wave a hand if there's an acronym or a term used that isn't making sense in the moment. We've got lots of experts up here, and this stuff is second nature to them. So let's make sure we do that. Next, we have Lisa Fischer. She is from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and she is going to be our expert tonight on the health impacts, in particular of PFAS and dioxane. So she's going to cover that for us. And Kristen, you're like my last name, Lasinski. I can pronounce every Polish name, but I'm gonna Schweighoefer.
Yep.
And which is what I had hoped. She is from the Washtenaw County Health Department, and she is going to be talking about how the county government interacts and has a role in addressing clean water issues. And she is also the woman who's going to talk to us about well water testing, how it's done, and how residents can get their wells tested. And then we have Dan Brown, and he is from the Huron River Watershed Council. So how many of you have heard of that organization before? We got some feet stamping, some hands raising, absolutely. So, as a community, we know there's governmental agencies, and then there's groups that come together, that we come together as a community to support, to be involved in, and to work with. And so he is going to talk about how all of us as community members can advocate for our water and environment. And we are going to do that in 10 minutes with Jerry, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and 5 minutes, okay? So they're clearly not going to be able to address all of their expertise in their introductory period, but that's where your questions are going to be key. And without further ado, if you want to press your button, you're on.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I've been, as we said, I'm the district supervisor for the Department of Environmental Quality. No, that's okay. I should be talking anyways versus looking at the screen. With the Jackson district, we cover Washtenaw County and then the whole district here. So water defines every aspect of Michiganders' way of life. From how we work to how we play, and from what we eat to what we drink. Ensuring long-term sustainability of our water is critical to our economy and our quality of life. So one of the things that is new to us and is new to everyone is what is called emerging contaminant. PFAS is one of those. And while this area is well versed in dioxane, and there's a lot of local experts here, it is actually considered an emerging contaminant throughout the country because there's not a lot of places where it's been used. Is there any way to get this on? Because I know no one can read those slides, so.
Is it this one
Yeah,
right here?
if they can't read them.
Click on that one. Will that get it to full screen?
Well, I'm gonna have to just free flow. So I'm gonna have to look down a little bit, probably more at this than I would otherwise. Oh, well, it's a little bit better.
Almost.
But that's okay. So it'll make me, it'll relax me a little bit probably. So emerging contaminant is any really kind of chemical or material that have a pathway to enter the environment, and present a real or potential unacceptable human health or environmental risk. And either there's just not a lot of peer-reviewed human health standards, or standards and regulations are still evolving due to new science, detection capabilities, or pathways. One more back. Maybe, there you go. So again, like we said, PFAS, which, do we define it anywhere on the, I have a heck of a time pronouncing it. So I tend to just say PFAS is the only acronym that I'm gonna struggle with.
Safer that way.
Yeah, it's just easier and I don't sound dumb. But, oh, okay, yeah, if you just go to the next slide. There we go. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and there are a lot of them. They are a group of fluorinated compounds. They're resistant to heat, they're resistant to water, and resistant to oil. There's thousands of unique compounds. There's about 100 currently listed by the Toxic Substance Control Act, or TSCA, as it's called. They were used because of those properties, they were used in a lot of industrial applications. It's a persistent compound. PFAS does not break down in the environment, and it's also a bioaccumulative, whereas the PFAS builds up over time in various organisms and in various botany. So if we can go to the next slide, because of all of this, these various properties, it was used in a lot of things: aerospace, apparel. A lot of the things where we talk about on the west side of the state, that came from the tanneries and the use of Scotch Guard, water fabric, Scotch Guard, I can't think what their specific name is. That's Teflon coating. I was trying to think of the more generic name versus a company name, but again, so it was used in a lot of different things: electronics, oil and gas, energy, in hospital, film foaming, so firefighting foam or any fire suppressant foam, which is what was used. Then the next slide. Oops, sorry. So again, this is a discussion on the PFAS cycle, and I know this has got to be hard for people in the back to see, but in a nutshell, PFAS doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't break down naturally in the environment. So however it is released, So in the air, in the water, in the ground. There's various ways. You get it from the production when they made the PFAS. It can be in landfills for some of the waste that ends up in landfills. It can be in wastewater that's discharged from a wastewater treatment plant because of something that was put into their system to begin with. There could be direct discharges from plumes that could go into waterways. Firefighting foam, again, they have found some firefighting locations where foam was used, even minimally one time, has contaminated the ground and the groundwater in those areas. So plants tend to uptake it. We know fish uptake it, and this area knows that well because we have our own fish advisory warning in the Huron River watershed. So we know that it's there as well. And because of other systems, specifically Parchment and even some others in the country, we know that it can get into drinking water supplies. So next slide. And so because of that, MPART, or the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, was formed, and it was reaffirmed through executive order this past February. So it is now established long-term as part of DEQ and any successor organizations. I'm sorry, next slide. Because then we get into what. So this is a slide that kind of represents what we're here. What is the state of Michigan's Action Response Team? What is this? What do we do? So some of the things we're going to do is we're going to coordinate our communication, our tracking, our budgeting, our legislative outreach, and our media support. We're going to cooperate amongst all levels of government, which we have done a great job. As you can see, what we have here, specifically the Huron River Watershed, which we have had many conversations with and continue to work with. Our legislative people and all of our stakeholders and Roger and his groups and I mean I could go on with, there's a lot of people in the room. I see people in the back that know me too. more emphasis on multi-agency technical work groups. So we have these technical work groups where we're putting experts on these groups that are looking at very specific issues. And I had another slide that got into it. I want to say there's 14 or 16 multi-agency technical groups going on right now. And really what I'm doing is I'm what they call a regional team lead. So any of the sites that are having to be in Jackson District, which is Washtenaw County and the surrounding, some of the surrounding counties, is I'm working to get all of the quote-unquote silos within state government to kind of be working all together. And I'm just helping coordinate the communications. So a lot of you have probably, if you've been part of the updates that we've done on the Huron River Watershed, I've been part of those too. And it also, part of the recent order creates a citizens advisory work group as well. Some of the things that we have done, and I'll go pretty fast over this because a lot of this has been discussed before. You know, the need and the immediate risk that was identified was drinking water. So we looked at a lot of type 1 community well systems, surface water systems, groundwater systems, systems that are combined surface water and groundwater, similar to what Ann Arbor's is. And we also sampled a lot of type 2 non-transient, non-community water supplies, which are schools, child care providers, and Michigan Head Starts, which, you know, this type of testing is the first that was done in the country on this scale and this level. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more of the numbers. The coloring on this slide got off in translation, but I can give you, so as of February 8th of 2019, we have sampled 1,114 community water systems, 416 schools, 17 tribal entities have agreed and allowed us to test their systems, and 164 child care providers or Michigan Head Start locations. So, you know, roughly 1,760 systems. You know, and what this shows is that we had a very low percentage with actionable levels, the greater than 70, and I believe there was only the one that we found that in, which was parchment. We had some that are between the 10 and 70 parts per trillion of, again, and this is where, you know, if we don't talk acronyms, I can't finish in 10 minutes, because every time I say one of those words, it takes me 30 seconds. 10 to 70 PPT, and then we had those that were between non-detect and 10 parts per trillion. And you can see the non-detects, the complete non-detects are the highest numbers, the biggest ranges. So just for scale, there was only one that was above 70, so those percentages are really low at the bottom. But when we talk about the risk level of being 70 parts per trillion for the combined PFOS and PFOA, that is what it is right now. And with any emerging contaminant, that is the conundrum that we get into, is these numbers and these percentages are based on that 70. If health studies come back and legislative action and all these things come together and it's changed, then these numbers change. And as such, you know, the conclusions that are being made now could change. They could change. So as such, as things change, and this is one of the ones where if we can at least try, you know, we have the michigan.gov/PFAS response, and if it doesn't work, it's actually okay, because I know I'm getting short on time already anyways.
We'll email it.
Yeah, so they're going to email these links out, but we have one for Huron River. It gives you a timeline. We update that timeline. It's updated relatively regularly. We have a system put in place where every week there's discussions on whether things like this need to be updated and relevant information gets added. There's one for Huron River, and if you go to the next site, and I didn't want to leave the rest of the people out, we have the newer site that's been in the news, the Washtenaw Industrial Facility, Universal Die Cast and Saline. And you know, that website, you go to this website, you can find these sites right there, and you'll get the links there. And you can just stay on this slide. You'll be good now, because that was the last slide anyway. So, and the other slide that I didn't have, and it's because I didn't have a ton of time to prep for the, you know, the more announcement on dioxane. But there is also a great website that will include the link that sends out to, that has a lot of information on the Gelman site. It has a lot of relevant information for dioxane as well. And there's a lot of other local organizations that I'm sure they're also going to provide you links of, that also have a lot of good information on there. So again, we're going to be done in time, but I'll be willing to stay until everyone's questions are answered. And if I can't find the answers, I don't have the answers, I'll find you the answers and get back with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I guess a long and trusted advocate for us. And if I'm correct, you signed your name to a letter during the linked up period, correct?
I did.
He did. There were a number of courageous employees in the Department of Environmental Quality that signed a letter and sent it to the governor and to legislators, again, expressing their concern that if we moved forward with the no stricter than federal rule, that it would impede our work. And I think we should all applaud the courage of our state employees and the hard work that they do. And now Lisa, thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. All right, I'll talk louder. So I'm Lisa Fischer. I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and I work in the Drinking Water Investigation Unit. So my job is to make sure that people have clean drinking water. And so the role of MDHHS, or Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, is to provide the public information about the health effects of contaminants. Specifically, I work on the effects of contaminants found in drinking water. And we also recommend ways that you can limit or stop your exposure to contaminants found in your drinking water. So I deal with a lot of different contaminants that can be found in drinking water. Lately, I've been working a lot on PFAS, but I've also been brought in on the 1,4-dioxane issue in Ann Arbor. I also deal with lead, copper, and other heavy metals like mercury. And then 1,4-dioxane is considered a volatile organic compound, or VOC. So occasionally I'll work on VOC issues in drinking water as well. So I'm just going to make this short and sweet. I was just asked to talk about the health effects that are linked to both PFAS and or 1,4-dioxane. So as Jerry said, we call it PFAS because it's too hard to say per and polyfluoroalkyl substance all the time.
You did it very well, though. That was very good.
I do say a lot. So some of the human health effects that have been associated with PFAS include what I've listed here, and I know it's kind of small, so I'll read them out loud. Some health effects include lowering a woman's chance of getting pregnant, hypertension or high blood pressure in pregnant women, increasing the chance of thyroid disease, increased cholesterol levels, changes to immune response, and increasing the chance of cancer, specifically kidney and testicular cancer. And like Jerry said, it is bioaccumulative, which means it stays in fish and wildlife tissues. We don't have a ton of information on the effects of dioxane in humans, just because there haven't been a lot of cases of humans being exposed that we have like epidemiology studies for. The studies we have are from the 1930s, and it was people that were exposed through their occupation. But so far we've not seen any health effects from breathing low levels of dioxane, and at very high levels, much higher than you would see in drinking water. This would be, again, like an occupational exposure type of scenario. It can cause cancer and affect liver and kidney tissues. And unlike PFAS, dioxane does not bioaccumulate in fish and wildlife, so that's the one positive part of that. And that's it. And I made these short and sweet because I want to make sure you guys can, ask your questions about health, and then we can get more into that if you guys have questions.
Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Schweighoefer. I'm the Environmental Health Director with the Washtenaw County Health Department. Next slide, please. Washtenaw County Health Department is involved in primarily private drinking water wells. So those of you who have private drinking water wells, we permit those wells. We review inspection reports for property transfer cases for those of you who may buy or sell a home that's on either a well or a septic system. We have the oversight of the non-community water supplies that Jerry mentioned earlier, and then we're a source of local information. We have been in this community a long time. I have staff that have been working here for decades upon decades, and so they have a long history with the development of many neighborhoods in our community. Excellent. So again, as I mentioned, we permit water wells for private homes. When that happens, we require a well record submittal. We also call it a well log. We want to know how deep the well is, what kind of soil went through, what soil layers the well driller went through to create the well, as well as any information on construction and soil types. One of the things we're looking for is that there's at least a good 10-foot clay layer to protect that well from any sources of contamination that may be above it, so surface or other sources of contamination. One of the things that's great in our community is that we have a lot of clay. It's awful if you have a septic system and try to replace it, but it's great for water protection. We require that initial well to be sampled for coliform bacteria, nitrates, and arsenic, and information on how to access your well records if you don't know how deep your well is are available on our website. It can be complicated because there's a variety of different ways to access those records. At the front desk where you signed in, you should have also been able to pick up a handout on some information about how to access your area sanitarium. So depending on what township you have, we have a person that's assigned to that township. Again, a number of them have decades of experience working in Washtenaw County, so they know a long history. They may have been the one out to oversee the drilling of your particular well. But you can also contact them and ask any questions you have about your particular home, and they'll be able to assist you through our website. So a little bit about PFAS, which we've already talked about, for fluoral and polyalkylated substances. We are not aware of any residential water wells in Washtenaw County with PFAS detections. So that's good news. In partnership with DEQ, we also sample somewhere between 55 and over 100 homes annually or even biannually for 1,4-dioxane. Right now we know of about 3 drinking water wells with 1,4-dioxane, and if you don't know that it's your home, it's not your home, because we're in very close contact with those individuals. Those water wells all get sampled at least twice a year. And there have been sporadic historical detections. We've had a well that may have had a positive detection a few years back, and then we haven't seen it again. And again, at this time, there are no broad recommendations to test your home for PFAS or 1,4-dioxane. So it's not something that we're recommending broadly for everyone. If you're near the dioxane plume, we are in contact with you, and we are sampling homes that we think are closest to the plume and at greatest risk. And we've been changing that, so over time we're sampling more and more homes to try and determine if there's any other areas that, but fortunately to this point we haven't seen any additional detections. Again, talking about non-community water supplies, what's a non-community water supply? It's a water system that provides drinking water for small groups of people, so more than an individual home, less than a municipal system. It's things like schools, restaurants, motels, campgrounds, churches. It doesn't include apartments or permanent residences. Those are considered municipal water supplies. And in Washtenaw County, there's about 240 of these type 2 water supplies that we oversee. So as Jerry had mentioned earlier, all schools and daycares that were type 2 or non-community water supplies were offered free PFAS testing through this state initiative. All tested child care centers were non-detect. I will say we had one who refused sampling and one who I think is still pending sampling earlier this year. They just couldn't quite get to the sampling schedule at the end of the year. We did have one school that had a positive detection, and I want to point out that that is 14 parts per trillion, so I apologize for the typo. Parts per trillion, it's a term I never thought I would be using in this lifetime, but there you have it. So Emerson Elementary School has been providing bottled drinking water and looking into other long-term solutions, and I think there was actually a meeting out there earlier this week to discuss that. At this point, there's no known sources of contamination near that school. They actually have 2 wells on the property, and 1 well was non-detect after some repeated sampling. We do have one daycare center that's tested biannually for 1,4-dioxane, but it has never been detected in that daycare center well. And as was discussed earlier, all 24 municipal water supplies in Washtenaw County were tested and results were received. The only detection was in the city of Ann Arbor. I think everybody's probably read that in the paper. But all other municipal supplies were non-detect, including YSUA, which services a number of our residents on the eastern part of our county. There has been a do not eat fish advisory for fish caught in the Huron River watershed due to the elevated PFAS levels. And if you have any additional questions, there's all those water sample results are available both on the washtenaw.org/PFAS site and then michigan.gov/PFAS response. Now, are we taking questions now?
Afternoon.
Okay.
So we're going to hold the question for just one moment,
Yeah.
but thank you, Kristen.
Oh, I had two more really, sorry, super
I'm
quick.
I thought you were.
I just saw the question, I didn't want to, I was doing it. So what is our role in the 1,4-dioxane contamination? We facilitate the Coalition for Action on the Remediation of Dioxane, or CARD, because that's a mouthful. Since it's, well, that group has been in existence for quite a while, but since it's founding in its current state since 2006. We are contracted with DEQ to perform those 1,4-dioxane residential water well samples, so we contact homeowners, we set up schedules to go out and test those homes. We review the data to ensure protection of public health, make recommendations for better data and monitoring, advocating for using the best available science, take calls and questions, and of course provide education. Next slide. This is my last one. And then for the PFAS contaminants, again, we're taking calls and questions, and we do get those pretty frequently already about from homeowners about their well water. Obviously, it's an emerging contaminant. A lot of people want to know what we know about it. And we're happy to share that. We advise local residents if they're interested in water testing and filters. And again, there was a handout at the front desk about if you want to test your water well, how to do that for those two contaminants. Again, no broad recommendations right now, but if you're interested in doing those tests, we have ways to connect you with those resources. And then work with the type 2 water supplies on any further testing they're doing, coordinating those do not eat fish advisories. And then we're the liaison between local issues and statewide work.
Thank you, Kristen. I apologize for the interruption. Then you are released from saying perfluorochlorofluorocarbons. You can say PFAS from this point forward. I think we all got it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I'm Daniel Brown. I'm a watershed planner with Huron River Watershed Council. Based on the number of hands that shot up earlier, I can tell many of you probably know that we represent and speak for environmental protection across the entire watershed. Headwaters start sort of northward of Milford, Proud Lake Recreation Area, go all the way down to Lake Erie. So we represent and think of the interests in all the communities in the watershed. When we're thinking about So I am the PFAS lead, along with our executive director, Laura Rubin. Of course, we've been particularly attentive to that issue since it was discovered in the Huron River. I'll talk a little bit about that. We have been attentive to the dioxane plume, as many of you know, for a long time. I can't say a lot about that, and that is, I know, frustrating to many of you. It's certainly frustrating to us because we joined the lawsuit against Gelman. What we can say on dioxane is that we were added to the lawsuit based on the concern for how the dioxane plume would affect the Huron River corridor and the communities downriver. As you know, Barton Pond, the intake for Ann Arbor's drinking water supply, is right where we think the most likely area of the dioxane plume affecting the river would begin. The economic value of the Huron River is comparable to the University of Michigan football season. It's a pretty significant economic driver for the region. I am also the coordinator of the Huron River Water Trail, so this is something that I take particular interest in. As we're thinking about PFAS contamination, there's no evidence yet that PFAS contamination or PFAS exposure to your skin is something to be concerned about at this point. Dioxane is potentially carcinogenic through all pathways of exposure. So if dioxane were to reach the river, that would be particularly catastrophic, and based on that significant risk, that's why we were added to the lawsuit. We go next slide. So thinking about PFAS and what we can do, and you've heard a lot of great information already tonight, so I just want to kind of pull that together and think about what are steps, what do we need to do as citizens thinking about this locally and regionally. So the first thing I'll say is that we have some resources that were on the front table. Make sure you grab a couple of those HRWC handouts on PFAS. There's also an article in our newsletter that really details kind of the PFAS story for the Huron River to this point. There's some scary elements of that story. There are also some elements that I find particularly encouraging. The City of Ann Arbor, our other local partners, have really been incredibly proactive and I think inspiring to many of us in trying to not understand just the current risk of PFAS and keep everybody safe, but trying to understand what are the emerging risks of PFAS and where do we go from here. We don't have a drinking water standard for PFAS, and that is really hampering efforts to clean up and deal with the risk. So if I want everybody to think of just sort of two things that you can do when you leave here tonight. One is to make sure you just keep calling your federal and your state representatives. Make it a weekly habit. I have mine on speed dial. One I maybe don't call quite as often because I know she pays pretty good attention. Make that a habit. Make sure your representatives know that you want a strict drinking water standard. There are some bills in the Michigan legislature right now that I think would be very effective in doing that. The current health advisory from the EPA is 70 parts per trillion. Many researchers, many agencies have said that that health advisory level is way too high. So we want a much stricter standard. There's encouraging news from the EPA that they might look at possible actions, but any action that they take is going to take years. So we need action much faster than that on PFAS. So be advocates, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, talk about it over a glass of water with somebody that we need a strict drinking water standard. The next thing we can do pretty quickly, and this is another area where Ann Arbor has set an excellent example, is we need to make sure that our local fire departments are not still using PFAS-laden firefighting foam. This is something that is relatively easy to fix once fire departments are aware of the problem. Ann Arbor looked into this, realized it, swapped out their firefighting foam. It's simply an issue that many fire departments, especially in smaller communities, simply don't know what they're using. They aren't aware of a problem. So talk to your officials. Emergency responders, of course, very concerned about public health and safety. So in our discussion so far with them, they are more than willing to take steps to address the issue. The other thing I'll just say is that as this has emerged and there's a lot of information about PFAS coming at all of us from many directions, there are many different ways that you might be inclined to deal with this at home. In some cases, those solutions might be a good idea. Keep in mind that for the entire Huron River watershed right now, there is no place that we found PFAS in excess of the EPA health advisory. That's the good news. In drinking water. All of the home solutions that are out there right now are only certified to that EPA health advisory level. So you just want to make sure that you're thinking about the benefits of those home removal systems as you're considering the cost and the potential trade-offs of having to swap out the filters or potentially add bacteria to your water and other things like that. So you just want to be cautious about claims of effectiveness as the research is emerging and as we're all learning more. Next slide. We have been trying to stay on top of this as best we can. Another really encouraging point is that our environmental reporters across Michigan have been truly outstanding through the PFAS issue. MLive reporters, Michigan Radio, many others have been covering this really well. So we have, amongst other things, aggregated a lot of those stories onto our website. You can get to that at the website that's up on the screen. It's howc.org/PFAS. There's a lot of information that you heard tonight, maps, presentations. We held 2 meetings. Everybody that's up here right now was at one of these 2 previous meetings in Milford or at Washtenaw Community College. We had, like tonight, great turnout, a lot of interest, a lot of great questions. So you can watch the videos of those meetings as well if you're interested. So a lot of resources up there. I encourage you to check out the website. I think that's it.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Dan. A round of applause for him. I want to highlight the point that Dan just made. These folks aren't here just for one night and aren't just here for us here tonight. They have spent many evenings away from their homes and families to make sure that all of us are as informed as possible. So I'd like to really give them a special round of applause because this is really special. And the days of work get long and you tack these on and travel and additionally at night, it's really critical. So the original plan was to have folks line up on the right-hand side of the room and come up and ask questions. But we've got people standing room only. So I'm going to ask permission. We're going to try lining up down the middle. I think if you look straight ahead, you'll still be able to see the panelists respond. If it gets that folks are too much in the way and anybody can't see, just raise your hand and let me know. But we'll try the middle. I think that'd be kind of the safest way at this point. So who wants to ask the first question and come right here to do it? All right, there we go. Come on up.
All right, I guess a question for Jerry.
Can't hear you.
For Jerry? Okay. I think you showed the slide that showed how PFAS basically goes everywhere and you can't stop it. So how do you get rid of this stuff?
Currently, the way it's getting rid of, at least in drinking water systems, is through granular activated carbon. Again, as it's an emerging contaminant, there is, with any emerging contaminant, there is always a very business need to find a solution. GAC is the #1 solution, but you got a lot of people trying to make money, trying to find a solution. So a lot of the brains, which does not necessarily mean figure out how to fix that stuff. But currently, granular activated carbon is what we're using out of drinking water systems.
Thank you. Who has the next question?
You knew I'd come.
You're tall.
Hi, Steve Dito, Scio Township. You guys hit a hot button issue on the PFAS thing. Obviously, there are other water quality issues, and I'll just throw one up that I'd like to have you respond with any information you have. That's mainly like microplastics, other particles that are on a watershed level affecting our river. You guys have any insights into that? Thank you.
So I can tell you that here in Watershed Council, there's one of my coworkers I share an office with would be ecstatic to hear you ask that question. She has been really active at handing out what they call these core balls, which are little plastic devices that you can put in your washing machine. They look kind of like a sea urchin with curly Q things on them. I have one in my washing machine. It collects microplastics. Then you clean it out every so often. If you have pets, it's also a great way to collect pet hair. It's going to
Is there a status report about microplastics on the watershed as a whole? Do you have any information about that?
So in terms of volume, that's pretty hard to know. We know that most of the microplastics that end up in the Great Lakes come from inland waterways, which is why we are particularly interested in looking at solutions to do that. And there's lots of small things that we can all do to reduce microplastics getting into waterways. You can wear organic fiber clothing and things like that. And you can find more information on our website about a lot of that.
Great, thank you.
If I may, I have a couple of very short questions. And if more than one question isn't okay, please stop me.
A couple short questions.
First one for Kristen. What does YCUA refer to?
Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority, they're the folks who distribute the water.
Thank you. Also for Kristen, is the LASA water system a type 2 or a type 1?
I'm sorry, the last
Loch
one?
Alpine Sanitary Authority?
I believe that's a type 1.
So that non-community or municipal?
Municipal, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's for residents that sleep there, so it would be a municipal supply.
So would your agency be the one that, if I wanted to know about dioxane or PFAS in those wells, would your agency be the one to ask?
We can certainly look and see if we have any information in our records, but if it's a type 1 water supply, it's regulated through the Department of Environmental Quality.
So I would ask them.
And it would have been tested for PFAS, and
Okay.
it would have been negative, or non-detect, because we didn't have any detections.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think this is a short question for Daniel. Daniel, is there a place on Huron River Watershed Council site where one can find out, you mentioned the Ann Arbor Fire Department, and was really happy to hear that. But what about some of the smaller surrounding communities like Scio and Webster and other that have, like I think Scio has its own firefighting department. Is there a place that we can find out whether or not those firefighting departments are switching out?
So that's a great question. So not yet. That's something we're actively trying to pull together right now.
Oh, so not yet, meaning it's not posted yet, but you're gathering that information.
Yeah, we're
Great.
working on
Thank you.
essentially convening all the fire departments in the watersheds probably through the next several months. There'll probably be 2 or 3 meetings where we get fire chiefs together, emergency managers, and try to gather that information that you just outlined.
Terrific, thank you. My last question had to do for you, Gerald, and maybe somebody else will ask it. I'm concerned about the Adept plastic finishing plant. With some area, that there was no treatment in place for that chemical.
So is that's the plant that was the largest emitter coming out of Wixon into the Huron River watershed? The Adept plant?
Oh,
Is that the
Tribar?
name? Tribar,
Oh,
that's the
gosh.
name of it. That's why it
Okay.
wasn't familiar to me. Yeah. Tribar,
Yeah.
is that the one that was the one that was?
called Adept plastic finishing, I'm sorry.
I think it's
If we're talking about the
Tribar.
big one in
The big
Wixon
one
that's
in
been
Wixon.
talked since the beginning of the PFAS
Yeah.
issue,
Is
we've
Tribar.
been calling it Tribar.
Yeah, Tribar, it's one of the owners, yeah.
Down it.
So, do you want to speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, so
About
they-
the tools that the DEQ has when an emitter has been found of PFAS. What are the tools that are at your, that you have available to you to encourage them to stop emitting? Can we force them to stop emitting? And how did we find
Yeah,
out they
yes.
were emitting?
Through some of the state efforts, through testing, it's called the Industrial Pretreatment Program, they asked all the MS4 communities, which we could go on forever. MS4 is stormwater drains. So what they were looking, specifically sampling those to looking for PFAS, but they were asking the communities whether they had users of PFAS chemicals in their systems, and then they were sampling. Wixom sampled, found it, went back up their pipe, basically, and began to look up their pipe. They found that Tribar had used it. My understanding is Tribar had stopped using it a very long time ago, but because of PFAS being forever, it was still being dragged out through the process that they were doing. They now have treatment systems in place, and they're continuously, those levels continue to go down. Our tools in the toolbox was, there is a water quality standard of 11 for PFOA. S is 11. Again, I got a piece of paper, I gotta look for all that stuff. Those continue to go down. So because of that level, they would have them, it could be in a permit, so they do need to meet that 11, but we do allow time for that using best available, science and methods that they're using right now, and they continue to monitor that situation. But I know last I saw, the levels are significantly lower than they were when they first got tested.
Dan?
Yeah, so to the question about why didn't we just shut Tri-Bar down? Why didn't they just shut Tri-Bar down? So that's a question that I think we've heard it, as you can imagine, every meeting. If I'm summarizing briefly, it's that there really is no legal course of action to simply shut down a pipe, to shut down operations. There's really just not a legal option to do that. What we have seen, so there's some frustrating parts of this, but there are some encouraging parts of this. Within about a month of being told that they had a problem, Tri-Bar put in these giant GAC filters. As Matt Knob described it, it's sort of the largest Brita filter that you can imagine. They brought in these portable filters, installed those at their effluent. Very quickly after they installed those filters, we saw the PFAS and PFOA levels drop precipitously. They're still nowhere near zero. They're still too high based on the last results that I've seen. But within, I think it was a month or two, they came down by an order of magnitude. And it's still trending the right direction. Right from the effluent of Tri-Bar, based on communications we've had with some wastewater treatment plant, they're essentially at non-detect, so those filters have been incredibly useful. What we're still seeing, and we don't know this for sure, so it's we're hypothesizing. We think what is happening is that there's about 2 miles of sewer pipe between Tri-Bar and the Wixom wastewater treatment plant. There's probably residue of PFAS and PFOA in that pipe because what's coming out of Tri-Bar is very near zero. So there's good news in that those filters seem to have worked for those 2 PFAS chemicals. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
So one highlight that I want to make is when we're talking about what are the tools we have to make sure our drinking water is clean, with only an advisory from the federal government and no state clean drinking water standard, there can be no legal enforcement of a rule that doesn't exist. Okay? It's very clear, it's very frustrating, and it puts us in a precarious position. So I actually am grateful, quite frankly, for those of us who are downriver from the manufacturer, that they did take positive action, that they are putting things in place. But we shouldn't have to be grateful to someone for doing what's right for us to have clean drinking water. So, but thank you and appreciate both of you.
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. I'm Vince Crusoe with the CARD Group, founding member, board member of the CARD Group. I would like to encourage residents to contact their political entities and ask that the EPA do a full evaluation for 1,4-dioxane contamination. They stopped in midstream because the governor would not allow it, and they will not do a project to full fruition until the governor allows it. So we have a new governor, and we can, I think, petition her to encourage EPA to go forward with a full evaluation so we know what we're dealing with from EPA's point of view. It's not to say that it'll be a full Superfund effort, but if EPA were to do a Superfund effort on this site, their goal is to clean up the aquifer completely to its original state, which would be a tremendous benefit to the community. Ann Arbor gets about 90% of its water from Barton Pond. Had geologists telling us that the plume is moving in that direction. They moved the prohibition zone north towards Barton Pond about 1.5 years after they established it. So I think we need to have a full evaluation. I think Ann Arbor needs to reconsider. They did not join Ann Arbor Township, Scio Township, the Huron River Watershed, or the Sierra Club Huron Valley group in petitioning EPA. I have a question about PFAS. It's considered a forever chemical, but from my understanding, it doesn't stay in your system forever if you eat it, or human at least. I think maybe I read 5 years, but I think it's important to note that if we get rid of it right away and people or stop getting exposed to it, it will degrade or it'll be eliminated over time. So I think that's an important issue.
Let the expert answer that one, and then I'll come back to your original comment. Lisa, could you address the bioaccumulation?
Yeah, so there's different rates, different half-lives for different PFAS chemicals. So I want to say PFOS has a half-life of 6 years. So that means, however much of PFOS you have in your body in 6 years, half of that will be gone. So that gets slowly eliminated from your body over time. And it has a lot to do with the carbon chain. So to take you all back to chemistry class, the longer the carbon chain is, usually the longer it takes to be eliminated from your body.
So I want to address that word forever chemical. So we're hearing that stated. Its degradation out in the natural environment is quite long, which is why it's called a forever chemical, versus the fact that maybe in 6 years it degrades in your body, but out in the environment?
Yeah, in the environment, yes, it persists forever. It does not break down in the environment naturally.
Okay, and in the human body, we're saying we'll have about, if we stopped right now, we'd have about a half as much as we have right now in our bodies in 6 years.
Right, and it doesn't actually break down in your body, it just gets eliminated in the same form. Yeah.
Oh, so it can then forever return to the environment?
Yeah, it's not leaving the environment, it's just changing form.
It's I like to think of it as like, imagine that you swallow a marble, in 6 years,
it'll still be a marble.
Half of that marble will be gone, but it'll still be a marble.
But it'll still be a marble. Okay, so there we go. I'm sure lots of us just had a lot of interesting images flash through our brains. One other thing that we haven't quite mentioned that I do also want to mention along the forever line is that the way PFAS moves through the environment. So we mentioned the do not eat fish advisory. So how many of us are enjoy fishing? So would you rather eat a lake trout or a bottom feeding fish? Okay, so bottom feeding fish is usually what we think. We usually think that chemicals fall to the bottom of a river or a lake, they rest in the sediment, and that's why in general we prefer fish who swim in the middle or upper ranges of depth of water. However, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that PFAS is a surfactant. It more readily moves across the surface. So if you were to test a catfish and a bluegill, you would be more likely to find PFAS in the bluegill than in the catfish. Is that correct? I'm seeing some confused faces up there. This is what was explained to me one day on the river, and I want to double check it.
You go first.
I get to ask a question every now and then too.
So that's absolutely right. It's a surfactant. So it, sort of the way to kind of calibrate your thinking on PFAS is that it was, a Teflon type substance. It's a coating. It was used to make surfaces really smooth or to protect from even more toxic or hazardous chemicals. So it's made to be resilient, smooth, long-lasting, and stays near the surface of things. So it stays near the surface of the water. The good news on that is that it seems like, based on some very early numbers that we're seeing over the course of the river, that it flushes pretty quickly down the Huron River, for example. It also concentrates in foam. That's why there was the advisory to not ingest river foam. So don't flip your kayak right by a dam when there's a lot of foam or something like that. Also keep your pets away from river foam because, as some of us know, many of them will try to eat it rapidly. So it does concentrate in the surface in foam and in other things like that. In terms of how it, so I know that in terms of how it accumulates in different fish species.
I was making a general point, we don't need to go into specifics,
Yeah.
but
Okay,
in the
good.
middle versus bottom. Let's not
I'll say,
just
I can
that
give you a
idea
little,
that's more
but-
towards the top, not
Okay.
towards the bottom. I named 2 fish that I know. All right, so, I say, again, I'm raising 3 sons, the things I've pulled hooks out of, we don't even want to mention. I'm just gonna grab Mary, if you don't mind, I know that.
I just wonder, Saline has a river raisin watershed. And of course, Saline's in Washtenaw County, so who would have jurisdiction? This is great and it is very important, but I'm wondering who's watching the river raisin?
I am, we are.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah, so, and certainly the River Raisin Watershed also oversees the health of the Saline River, yeah.
Excellent.
I live in Ann Arbor, and we're on the city water system, and we use the word catastrophic to describe the dioxane plume. At the same time, you said you can't really talk about it for the lawsuit. That's kind of frustrating. So that's just, I don't know if you want to adjust that, but we're
I
just
will,
sitting
because
here.
I could talk about it.
Sure. And then I have a follow-up.
Absolutely.
So I am not party to the lawsuit, which also means I don't know what's happening inside the lawsuit. But when, about 25 years ago, when the Paul Gellman plume, you'll notice that a lot of us, when we say 25 years ago and are looking for historical reference, look toward Roger Rayle. He was one of the founders, as well as the gentleman who came up earlier, of the Citizens Action for the remediation of dioxane. So we always glance towards him if he gives us about what we're saying. At that time, we had, when it was found, there was polluters must clean up. And under the Engler administration, it was changed to, instead of a cleanup standard for pollution, a containment standard. So you didn't have to clean up your property if you could contain it. Now, that we have more science, we have more things. Let's be honest, it's like peeing in a swimming pool, right? Smoking in a restaurant. We now understand you can't contain smoke to a smoking section versus a non-smoking section, and we know very well with a lot of the chemicals and things that containment is often physically impossible. But a containment area was set up through the court system, through a lawsuit. That's what was determined. That containment boundary has changed over time, but that is still the standard. The lawsuit is looking at addressing the cleanup standard, the containment area, and many of those facets within there. And being a very active community, we're never happy to simply think of one way to solve a problem. So we have the lawsuit moving forward, we have action at the legislative level that we've been trying to move forward, and then we have the third option, which was mentioned, which is pulling in the EPA and establishing a Superfund site. And so with those 3 pathways forward, the criteria that all of us are using to judge is what is the fastest, most effective, best way to get us to clean, safe drinking water for all of us. I am just as anxious as you are to hear the outcome of the lawsuit, and I'm so grateful for all the parties who have joined it to add that pressure. During the course of the lawsuit, which has been going on, these things take time, 18 months, 2 years, the cleanup standard was lowered from 85 parts per billion to 7.2. And that did have a direct impact, I would perceive, on whatever the lawsuit negotiations were happening, because now we have to talk about measuring all the way down to below 7.2 for detect. What are the boundaries then if you're not measuring to 85, but you're measuring out, and what it takes to clean up to a much lower standard. So we have 3 pathways to success. It's only been 25 years, but we're all pressing forward just as hard as we always have.
Just to follow up also the MLive article the other day about the dioxane that was in fact found in the Martin Pond. So that Gellman is still releasing dioxane into the water. It has permits which are up for renewal this year. Is the DEQ planning on adjusting that for the public?
So I know that did sound very scary on the news article that said Paul Gellman is still emitting dioxane. If you could add some clarity around that issue.
Yeah, so Gellman definitely has it's called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. that allows them to discharge treated groundwater at a point it's a tributary to Honey Creek. It's up for renewal. I'm just looking at my notes here, just so I know I'm right. So, the permit itself expires October 1st of 2019. They need to submit a new permit app by April 4th of 2019. I don't review those permits, so I don't know necessarily the criteria, other than, there is the criteria for what they call GSI, was groundwater surface phase interface. There's clean water, Rule 57, right? I'm confused now because I don't have it in front of me. And all of that will be taken into account. But the key in my mind is that what they're doing is that's treated water, so they're taking it from a spot of plume where it is really, really bad, and they are treating it, and then they're discharging below their permit limits. And they have consistently been below their permit limits for the period of the
So
permit.
Jerry, can I answer? So I want to clarify. Is the Gelman site currently using dioxane in a manufacturing process that is being released into the environment?
It is not.
It is not. The dioxane that is being released into the environment is the result of the pump and treat, which is how the water currently, the plume, if we can picture it as a lake or how I don't know, you physically describe it. If you can picture like a smoke plume that goes up in the air, flip it upside down and put it underground, and imagine that is the dioxane that's gone and spread underground. And right now, the current way to take it out of the ground and take it out of the system is to pump it out of the ground, treat it, and then it is discharged at what are considered safe levels through the permitting
They
process.
have a permit. I have the numbers here.
Mm-hmm. What are the
so-
detect levels when they're allowed to discharge?
Yeah, so it's a 7 monthly average is their max limit ppb, and daily max at 22 ppb.
And so they have specific quantities of treated water that they then discharge. So they are not currently using a manufacturing process. Any discharge that is happening is as a result of the pump and treat process that they've been using to remove it from the ground. Does that make it a little clearer?
It does, but it's still unfortunate.
It is still scary. It is.
Well, and just, there is a public comment period as part of that permit application, so there will be a formal opportunity for everyone to provide comment on it.
So we will include that as well. Let's be very clear, this is going to be a very long email you're going to be getting. And I will say, when I advised our panelists about how many handouts to bring, completely on me, I said 50. All right, so thank you very much for showing up. But before we, there will be all of scanned copies and PDFs of all of the information out there. If you didn't get a handout, will be included in the email as well. It will be a long email. We may send it in parts. Okay? Come on up. So we have about 12 minutes left, so we're going to try and make sure we get to the end of the question line.
Just to give people a shortcut to where they can access these devices. To where they can access these devices that catches the particles of plastic from laundry. Where do they access those, get those?
So we had a whole stash of them at HRWC. I think we just gave away our last few, so I think we're all out. Based on interest, I think we may replenish our supply. I think we're all out for now, but Corball you can find online. Corball, C-O-R-A, ball.
And also this litigation to control polluters, you said you don't have it. Is it in process? Is there an HR number or something you can call legislators about?
Legislators, yes. So we are just at the beginning of the new session. So right now with fellow Representative Lori Pohetsky, she is sponsoring the bill to repeal the prohibition from us not being, right now we cannot establish a rule that's stricter than federal. Representative Lori Pohetsky, I'm a co-sponsor, are introducing that bill in the next week or so. We are working very hard to get sponsors on both sides of the aisle to do that. And so, and when we get that number, I will be in my e-news when we send it out for you to advocate. What just happened is January 11th, I was sworn in for my second term. Each legislative session is 2 years. A bill is introduced, sent to committee, voted out of committee, voted on the House floor, sent to the Senate, put in committee, voted out of committee, voted on the Senate floor, sent to the governor's office, if everything goes well. So, legislative sessions are 2 years long. Whether you made it to step 9 out of 10, or you just made it to step 1, the slate is wiped clean. So, we are working again to have the bills drawn up, to have the co-sponsors gather, to begin the negotiation, and to introduce the legislation again. And so where we had bill numbers previously, it will have a bill number on that in about a weekish.
Is this a politics thing, or is it just a procedure thing that's holding it up?
So the process, the procedure of steps 1 through 10, committee, bill, House, that's established by our Constitution, and that's the old schoolhouse rock, I'm only a bill, sitting here. That's the procedure. How it doesn't make it to step 10 and get signed into law is the politics.
So it means call your.
So it needs procedure and politics. And so again, we wrote, yes, oh, thank you. This one is actually very helpful. I know it's called a student's guide to the legislative process, but it is the clearest description of how we make laws in the state of Michigan. Carol.
So we love you, and we trust you, we know you're going to do the right thing, but how about everybody else? When we write our letters, you represent us, and we know you're going to do it. But who do we write to that's not going to do it?
Okay, we have some new opportunities. So along with our election in November, we have here, so the 52nd House District, which I described, we have a new state senator who represents us. She is State Senator Lana Tice. She represents the whole of Livingston County and then the geographic majority, about 2/3 here, Washtenaw County. We'll include her contact information as well. We need to advocate strongly with Lana. I would really like to have her as my partner in this, and I would appreciate your support in gaining that. Part of this district is represented by Representative Debbie Dingle. The rest, the majority, is represented by Representative Tim Walberg. We will include both of their information as well in the email. And Representative Tim Walberg is having a coffee hour. He just announced yesterday or today for tomorrow. Monday in Dexter. And so I'm not sure where he's putting that out publicly, and I'm sure it's fine that I'm saying it. But could you tell me the details? Oh, she'll pull it up and we'll say it at the end.
Screenshot of a letter.
Yeah, there we go.
So,
Got it. We'll pull it up in a minute. You go ahead with your question while she's trying to see info.
Washtenaw County Road Commission in August sprayed 5 townships in the southeastern part of the county with Dow's present version of Agent Orange, Tordon K plus Escort. They violated 7 standards on the label. They sprayed wetlands, they sprayed drainage and irrigation ditches, shallow wells such as occur in Augusta Township with sand soil without the clay cap, etc., etc. They sprayed private land with no notification to the owner, and so I'm wondering from the county employees if there's anything that we can do to curb these practices. It certainly affects the water. Most of those townships flow into the Raisin, but I have it on authority from county employees. They're going to do the whole county.
Thank you for making us aware of that. Let's hear what you have to say. Thank you. Do we know, is that a familiar issue, or is that something we have to follow up on?
I'll have to follow up on that. I know we've heard isolated concerns on specific roadways, but I'm not aware of a broad concern. So
They got several letters and never answered them from townships. From the board of townships, they never answered them.
To the road commission.
That's
Yeah,
right.
they're a separate entity from the health department, but I mean, obviously we're located near each other.
So thank you. I will follow up directly
Yeah.
with the road commission on that. We will send a separate email out on that issue as we gather that information to the group. Good. Thank you for raising the issue.
Thank you.
How many more people are actually in line and how many are standing in back? So it looks like we have 4 in line. We have 7 minutes, so let's try to go a minute and a half each. Question and answer.
Kathy Griswold from the City of Ann Arbor. Kathy Griswold, City of Ann Arbor Council. I want to acknowledge the water experts that we have from the city of Ann Arbor. Brian is here, and I don't know if your other staff member left.
I think she left, yeah.
Oh, okay, so we take it very seriously in Ann Arbor. My very simple question is, the EPA standard is for cleanup, Michigan standard is for containment. Is there any way without having a Superfund site designated to get an EPA order for cleanup directed at MDEQ?
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Jerry, anyone have a legal answer to that?
I do
one?
not know the legal answer
Okay.
to that question.
That's another one I get to ask. Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, so first I just want to really thank you for organizing this, and obviously there's a lot of excitement and interest in keeping our waters as clean as possible.
Say your name, Rita.
Okay, I'm Rita Locke-Caruso. I'm a professor of toxicology at the University of Michigan. I'm also a charter member of CARD and just been involved in a fair bit of issues. But the question I have is first I want to make a comment that it's difficult to understand the regulatory process, and we've done a really great job in trying, deciphering the different things, what's a federal advisory. I don't think a lot of people understand how few chemicals are actually regulated by the EPA. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, it's less than 100. And an advisory, a health advisory, carries no regulatory authority, and the EPA has no regulatory authority for private wells. So I think that there's a lot of education that we can do and should do. My question is about the PFAS, that there's at least 4,000 permutations of these chemicals out there, and the way the laws are written is that it's a regulatory whack-a-mole, that all they have to do is change one atom in these chemicals, and now the regulatory process begins at ground zero. So it's going to require some kind of a new strategy for dealing with these chemicals, I think, and I just wonder, at the state level, you can't regulate 6 chemicals in PFAS and think you've solved the problem, because they're just going to add one more carbon or one less fluorine, and we're back to square one.
One, I have learned in my life to never disagree with a professor.
Oh, you're not in my class then.
I know. But my son may be soon. Yes, absolutely. And what's strange to me, so with PFAS, we're talking about a category of chemicals here that, as was stated, actually contains probably over 1,000 or thousands of permutations. To me, the strange parallel here is actually to illicit drug regulation, where you can outlaw a new form of heroin or other type of drug, and then they just change the chemical mixture that goes into it just a tweak, and all of a sudden it becomes legal until it becomes illegal again. I think that we have enough smart people, quite frankly, that we will be able to, when we have the will at the federal level and at the local level, to be able to define the category in such a way that we will be inclusive as opposed to exclusive. It's just the mandate that our community is demanding of us. And I think that is the burden we're going to have to carry, is to get the really smart people in the room and define the category and not focus so much on a single chemical.
Thank you. Amy Shapansky from Ann Arbor. With Ann Arbor in mind, and the fact that we draw our water from a relatively small body of water and we're facing these contamination threats, is it time to think about hooking up to Detroit water and much larger bodies of water like the Detroit River and the Huron for our safety?
All right. So my Ann Arbor water official, where's my Ann Arbor water staff member? Come on over, that's you. Come on in. I would like you just to, we have had, my neighborhood is actually just south of Meyer. I have raised my children on Ann Arbor City water while living in the township. I read my water quality reports on the regular basis that you issue them. And I have never stocked bottled water in my home. I've always felt very safe drinking from my tap. I hope to continue to. What is your assessment of the current state of Ann Arbor water and what it looks like in the future?
Lots of questions right there, and I only have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
But I guess let me address the question that I just heard about, should we be considering an alternate water source? We anticipate that that's a question that we're going to hear, and we're going to be prepared to answer that as we look at future improvements that we need to do to our water system in Ann Arbor. We're on the cusp of a rehabilitation similar to what happened with our wastewater plant. So we're talking significant capital improvement, $90 million. Obviously, we're going to choose to invest that kind of resources in our water treatment plant. We need to be assured that we're doing it for a water supply that we can provide safe drinking water to our customers for many generations. So we're very sensitive about that. We're also about to issue our next water quality report. So within the next 2 weeks, that'll be available, and we'll be talking about a lot of these issues. We're following this just like everybody and learning along the way. We feel like we've been extremely proactive in our response to these issues regarding PFAS. We have been one of the most proactive utilities in the state. With the guidance of our city council, we're already striving for levels that are more stringent than the most stringent regulatory levels that exist in the United States. So we're talking about 70 parts per trillion at the state level. We're talking about less than 10 in Ann Arbor. We're involved in research as well. So trying to be part of solution development around these issues is also a priority for us. So we're doing our best to serve our customers and to guarantee that they're having a safe water for their families.
Thank you. I had the privilege of touring our water treatment center just a couple months ago, and it's impressive. And as I was going through, I was able to see the cutting edge research that's being done for us on our behalf, and quite frankly, being able to see the investment that the water department is making in ensuring that we're safe. And so I'm pleased to see that. And for our final question of the evening, then I'll wrap it up and we'll have a round of applause. Sir?
Richard Blake, Linden Township. Could you speak for a minute about the legislation introduced by Representative Robbie and Senator Irwin? I believe it's 4212. Most of the last hour and a half we've been focusing on perfecting our techniques of closing the barn door after the horse has already run off. And seeing this infant in the back of the room, I somehow don't think that's good enough for this individual back here. So could you please address that piece of legislation, and could you tell us if you intend to support it?
Yes. So I believe you're referring to the Polluters Pay Bill. Is that correct? That's the acronym for it. Again, as I referenced, it used to be, prior to Governor the Engler administration, that polluters had to pay to clean up. Then we shift to the containment strategy, and Senator Irwin and Representative Robbie are introducing what's called a bicameral piece of legislation. So it's being introduced in the Senate and the House at the same time for us to go back to polluters pay. So I really see there's kind of three parts. Polluters pay still means that the horse has left the barn, and we're just defining who's going to pay for the cleanup. And so I am part of our PFAS work group on the House side that is looking at the elimination. There's also one part when we talked about the emitter in Wixom, is we also have a permitting process that says before you can emit water into a river, you have to make sure it doesn't have these chemicals in it. Right now, the permit process, again, is based on an advisory, is based on a suggestion. We can ask that they disclose, we can't force that they disclose. So not only we want to know what you're putting out of your plant before it goes out of your plant. We want to know what's going into our water systems before it happens. If it gets into the system, we want to have a mechanism to force you to clean up, and the Polluters Pay Bill says, and you're going to pay for it and not us. I am a co-sponsor. I'm on the work group of all of those pieces of the puzzle. And we really have to put them all together. The other thing we have to do is we simply don't have enough research to answer all of your questions. And we need to be funding. When we look at the funding that's gone into the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Environmental Quality, now EGLE, We know that we are not putting enough into the basic research to understand the health impacts of this on us, our invertebrates, our marine animals, and human beings. Right, so we need to invest in finding out what the pieces are for us. Honestly, if I was to throw my dream scenario out there, you would not be able to introduce a new chemical in the United States until you could prove that it was safe, instead of asking us as residents to prove that it's unsafe. It is 7:30. We will all be here to answer your questions. You will get in email. Please make sure that you have written legibly, or send an email to my office if you think that you haven't, to get the response email. Thank you so much.
Real
quick, Monday to Walters at 9:30 a.m. at the Dexter American Legion. Tim Wahlberg, 9:30 a.m., Dexter American Legion.